a associate professor and chairman of the history department at Sam Houston State University. He writes a weekly column in Forbes. He literally wrote the book on the Reagan legacy, Iconoclast, and a fierce defender of supply-side economics. Professor of economics, by the way, Brian Domitrovic joins us now. How are you, Brian?
I'm great, Crane. How are you?
Good. I didn't mean to get your blood pressure up if I did by sending you those clips of Elizabeth Warren, but she does go after Ronald Reagan, and I thought, hey, why not just allow you to respond to some select clips? Because what happens is people see the prosperity we have in America, and they forget how we got it. And then, well, roll it.
I mean, when Reagan came in and it was morning in America. I mean, the direction toward greatness. Pride.
Yes, that is the right time when this happened.
All right, so we're on the same page so far.
That's right. And what happened was that he had a couple of ideas. The first one was that they would fire the cops. Not the ones on Main Street, but the ones on Wall Street.
The ones who are shackling creativity and ingenuity in our financial institutions.
And making sure that the biggest financial institutions actually followed the law. Those were the cops they got rid of.
Okay, but the law, that's a vague term. Law.
No.
Law, one man's law is another person's regulation. And regulation is bad. Regulation stifles business and stifles entrepreneurship.
No. See, if we don't have some basic rules, then what happens is exactly what happened then, and that is the big financial institutions made billions of dollars by cheating people on credit cards and mortgages.
Okay. What do you mean cheating people on credit cards? You sign up for a credit card, you use the credit card, then you have to pay your bills. Is that too complicated for Harvard?
Now, which I thought that was pretty funny, actually, because it threw it right back. But, Brian, tell me something. Reagan looked at, hey, unshackled Wall Street, and inevitably that led to the 2008 financial crisis. Lack of regulation. Ooh, that bad Ronald Reagan.
Elizabeth Warren's completely wrong on the facts. I mean, she implies that there was a major policing of the financial sector in the 1970s, and then it ended in the 1980s. I have no idea what particular incident she's referring to, because there was no change in the regulatory environment outside of one small quarter having to do with savings and loans, the most insignificant part of the banking system. So simply as a factual matter, there's no deregulation to speak of, even in the 1980s. So she's just making stories up and talking about them on comedy television.
Well, let's continue. This is our second clip where she picks up on what exactly happened in the 2008 crisis. And she really goes into some themes of bankers going to jail and mentions the drug laundering, which actually did drug money laundering. Well, roll it.
No, you just accused Reagan of supporting cheating people. Those were your words.
So let's be clear about this. It was supporting having the regulators look the other way, while the biggest financial institutions hid every trick and every trap possible in credit cards, in mortgages, in your checking account rules. And they made billions of dollars doing it, and at the same time, they loaded up on risk. And what ultimately happened by 2008 was that they broke the economy. They got bailed out by the taxpayers. They continued to break the law in foreclosing on people's mortgages.
Okay. What laws did they break? Name one law they broke.
How about the mortgage laws that said they were supposed to follow certain rules when they foreclosed against people's homes? And what they did, in fact, is they said we could save a lot of money if we didn't follow the law. They've actually admitted to that. But here's the key part. Nobody went to jail for any part of this. The only people in America today who go to jail are regular folks. Big financial institutions get out there, they launder drug money, they violate the law, and still no one is held accountable.
Now, dealing with leftists, they throw in like events in history, combine them all into a big snowball, and then throw it at the conservative who's saying, wait a second, I got to break that apart. So, Professor, I need your brilliance. Break that apart, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, first of all, Bernie Madoff is in jail, so I don't know what she's talking about. Nobody went to jail. And, the SEC reports on Madoff are really funny because that was the regulator that was in charge of monitoring that. And they just came out with a big report saying, oh, yeah, we completely missed it, even though we were given multiple flags. So the idea that we should have regulators out there watching everyone is kind of funny because they've already proven they can't do their job. She's talking about one period and one period only, and that's 2000 to 2008, when the Federal Reserve loosened money like crazy. Before 2000, throughout the entire Reagan period and the Clinton period, the Federal Reserve kept money stable. The dollar was consistent against gold at $300 an ounce. The financial sector did nothing compared to the industrial and the tech sector of this economy. You didn't see any kind of predatory lending practices. As soon as the Federal Reserve undermined the value of the dollar, all of a sudden the return to the profitability of managing money increased, and that's where you saw some funny business in the housing market. It wasn't until the Federal Reserve debased the dollar in the early 2000s. It has nothing to do with Ronald Reagan.
So what do we miss? I mean, I recognize you talked about the Fed again, which is at the foundation, and I get that. But the other part to this is bankers made off with our money, and they weren't regulated enough. I get the idea that actually they were regulated into giving loans that they didn't have to carry per se. They could divide up and roll up into securities. And bottom line, they could do this because the goal was affordable housing and government was pushing that. Is that
There's no
true?
question about that, Craig. Peter Wallison of the American Enterprise Institute has written about this definitively. Here's what happened. The Federal Reserve all of a sudden starts debasing the dollar in the early 2000s. What that means is there's going to be a flight into hard assets, and the hardest of hard assets is land. So land prices, which is to say houses, start going up. This creates a bubble. Everybody wants to get in on the asset that's going up, 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 up. So all of a sudden the banks are besieged with buyers. The banks give them a lot of money, but they make sure the terms are very profitable for the banks. That has nothing to do with regulating banking. It has everything to do with the Federal Reserve undermining the value of the dollar. Throwing more regulators out there would be completely irrelevant. The point is, Federal Reserve, don't undermine the means of exchange. That's why we had the housing bubble.
So once again, we're told things that are not true, but they really work for us because then we can we can drink our haterade and look at bankers or people that seemingly are doing better than us in the sense of, it's Gordon Gekko on Wall Street. We have a villain, and this has got to drive you nuts because you know the truth, and you not only know the truth, you know how to solve the problem. You knew what led to the crisis. You know historically how things are misused. And you also know the state of our understanding of economics and how we sit there and all of a sudden we can have a villain and facts go out the door. How do we compete with that? How does the truth compete with the notion of Main Street versus Wall Street and that baloney?
Yeah, it's always even a little worse than you think. I mean, here's a senator, a United States senator, saying that the financial sector got enhanced unduly in the 1980s. Actually, it was the exact opposite. The financial sector was enhanced in the 1970s when gold was going to $800 an ounce from $35, and you had the California property boom because the Fed was undermining the dollar so much. That's when everybody had to try to figure out, what am I going to do with my money? And they went to financial institutions for help. The rush of money went the other way under Ronald Reagan. He stabilized the dollar and cut taxes. That's when investments flowed into the real economy, out of the financial sector. So it is breathtaking to behold the complete reversal of facts that these ideologues will present you with.
With the new regulation that we have today, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, this is supposed to make sure we never get into a place that we got into in 2008. Does it address that?
Well, Craig, we've talked about this on this show before. Now, I don't take these people at their word. I don't really believe that Elizabeth Warren is that upset that we have a problem, so-called, with predatory lending and all that stuff, in that she creates institutions that themselves benefit from predatory lending. The Consumer Products, her Consumer Board is a beneficiary of this problem. If the problem didn't exist, Elizabeth Warren's brainchild wouldn't exist. So So Elizabeth Warren has a vested interest in the Federal Reserve undermining the value of the dollar because it makes her political career.
So if we can understand what really, you mentioned Ronald Reagan. We also had a strong dollar under Bill Clinton. We can even take the politics out of it and the rewriting of his tax history of the tax increase versus the tax cut that actually produced prosperity. That said, when we talk about the dollar, Ronald Reagan sat in the Oval Office and explained inflation and how it was a tax. Can you bring us back to a sense of what is needed with the Federal Reserve and the policy of the Federal Reserve to make sure that we don't have malinvestment? And is there a way to take, it's almost as if, can we take the power out of the government's hand for manipulating the currency? And you address one of the attacks on a solution, which would be return to the gold standard. Your thoughts?
Ronald Reagan did such a beautiful thing back in the early 80s. He understood that there's a policy mix and the two sides lean against each other. When you cut taxes, investors all of a sudden want to make investments because they keep so much more of the profits. Because investors want to make investments, they want money. So if the Fed is producing money in the context of tax cuts, it will not feed the price level. It will actually feed real investment and job growth. When you have high taxes and tax increases and the Fed produces money, nobody wants it. And so it just leads to more of the torpor that we have today or the inflation that we had in the 1970s. It takes two to tango. You have tax cuts that increases the demand for money, and then the Federal Reserve can stabilize the dollar because all the money it's producing, people actually want for real purposes. Ronald Reagan proved that so magnificently. 18 million jobs came about in the 1980s, and the stock market quadrupled. It's waiting right there for us to do again.
The Fed's policies of artificially keeping interest rates low, printing the dough, if we're going into the populist argument of, hey, big guy, little guy, okay, and the rest of us are little guys and we have the big guys who have a lot of money, doesn't it benefit those who can manipulate the system in the sense and actually really hurt us who are unable to get those loans, make those investments, move it around, so to speak, and take advantage, if you will, of the artificially low interest rate?
If there's loose money and high taxes, obviously the people in power benefit, and the people who are really savvy in the economy benefit to the great detriment of the average person. I mean, if there's loose money and high taxes, you have to figure out how to make money. You might even have to call in a political favor. Well, the little guy doesn't do that. It's the well-connected K Street Beltway person who does that. When you cut taxes, you devalue every single government preference that's built into the tax code. And when you have stable money, you give people no option but to make money the obvious way, by making real investments instead of trying to play games with the dollar. So lowering taxes and stabilizing the dollar actually brings about an increase in economic equality.
When you deal with students and in the economic realm of teaching, and a general question here, what's the greatest misunderstanding they have coming in, the younger generation, about economics?
Well, the funny thing is, I find that the younger generation is pretty uncorrupted. It's these old liberal Keynesian verities are false. And so, unless you get the kids early, unless you get them in junior high school where they couldn't care less about this, I mean, it's not going to replicate itself. I mean, you're really going to have to pound away at these kids if you want to make them Keynesian. And that's what universities have done for 40 years. So I find when I get students, they actually are pretty good blank slates when it comes to economic reason.
And that's encouraging. But that also explains a lot about how they award prizes to the likes of Paul Krugman, who has done some good work when he hasn't gotten political, I guess, analysis-wise, back in the day. I don't really know, though, because everything I hear from him doesn't make sense. And I think when we hear about economics, somehow in the realm of politics, we have 2 + 2 = 5 in politics. 2 + 2 = 4 every place else. Why the jump? Why is it? Is it because we look at government never really taking from us?
But you have to wonder why all these people are in government to begin with. I mean, the Industrial Revolution in the United States is the greatest thing to ever happen in economic history. Why would you go into the public sector? Why would you seek out a government career? Something actually might be wrong with you if you're seeking out a government career. I mean, so the funny thing about there's a competition between government and the economy. The more the economy grows, the more irrelevant the government becomes. So the government has a built-in fear of becoming irrelevant and actually wants to hamstring economic growth, because that's the only way that the government can absolutely ensure it remains relevant. The government, represented today is Elizabeth Warren, actually fears a really robust economy.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And as you said, we've got to understand what you just recognized. Government is made up of human beings acting in their own self-interest. They haven't lost their human nature, though they think they've evolved. And I'm not speaking to every government bureaucrat, of course not. I'm speaking to the idea of a ruling class and people getting their power back. And the idea, they sell you a story that they're for the little guy, they're for us. Big bad rich people are the people that are the problem, when they themselves are tying us down and not allowing us to really fully use our godly gifts to bless others, to grow, to start a service or a business, or to invest to improve our lot in life and others. And so, Brian, we have the right answer. It just is going to take time. You mentioned it took 15 years before with the Reagan Revolution. Tell me, how long will it take? Do you see a quickening here, I hope?
Yeah, I mean, I'm ready to say that our economy has basically been pretty stagnant now for about 14 years. So if we begin the counting at about the year 2000, which is the last really good peak this economy had, we're basically at that 15-year mark. I mean, it took from 1966 to 1981 for the supply-side revolution to gestate. I don't know. I'm going to say it's going to take a little bit longer, but I'm always going to assume the American economy is much better at its job than the government is at maintaining its own preferences. So in a horse race between the government and the economy, I'll always bet on the economy, especially long-term.
Brian Domitrovic, it is a pleasure and privilege. Econoclast, the book, and the latest article defending the attacks on the gold standard and educating so many of us on the true history of monetary policy. Hey, it's a pleasure and privilege, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
Take care. All right, so isn't that guy brilliant? I got to give a shout out to Aaron for that one. Aaron with an E, not a double A, who will be on with us tomorrow night, by the way, Aaron Free. But this has been quite a show. I'm already getting responses from Jessie Jane Duff's appearance and her passion. Isn't that awesome? I always look at people who have served our country. There's something special about the 1% that has done that. And when Pete Hegseth or Colonel Kakulu or the likes of Jessie Jane Duff, who spoke passionately, she's outraged. And she spoke to the idea of pounding the fist on the table. Where is the accountability? That's what we want. It's not the mere optics of the emotion. It's the follow through. I'm going to change my schedule. I'm going to be on site. I'm going to go to these places. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to the truth, because I found out the people that served us were waitlisted to death. And we have a problem with whistleblowers coming forward now. Why didn't they come forward before? What was the problem there? What was the code of silence that was the umbrella of silence that was keeping them silent? And when we hear about being mad as Hades, I'm not much into the emotion of all of that because, we want to see somebody's mad. I want to see that passion translate into action. And that's what Jessie Jane Duff was speaking to. I think that's what we all want to see. I still have I look at the world and I'm like, why do we make allowances for evil regimes? Why do we apologize for our Judeo-Christian foundation? Why do we apologize for people who have been successful using their godly gifts? No, it's not money, hating money. It's the love of money. That's the problem. That's the sin. And yet they know our playbook, which is our human nature to look at others in an envious way. I just spoke, and I'll do this in reverse. I just spoke economically, I just spoke to national security, and I just spoke to the Veterans Affairs. And all of that, there's one common foundational theme. and that is a Judeo-Christian foundation, recognizing God the Father, sent his Son, only begotten, Jesus Christ, to die for our sins. We have the Holy Spirit, capital H, capital S, right? One and the same. And to let you know this, live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. God knows you, God loves you, he created you, and you're worth it. Know that. Don't discount yourself. The government is doing that in the ways I've mentioned. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, AFR Talk.